Two Canadian provinces are leading the way in opening the doors on physician-assisted suicide. To tell us what it means to the state of the debate in Canada, in Montreal, Quebec, André Picard, public health reporter and columnist at the Globe and Mail. And André, it's good to see you again. How are you tonight?
I'm good, thank you.
Very glad to hear it. Let's just do a little background here. It was back on January 15th that the Quebec government announced that it wanted to introduce legislation laying out the rules for what they called medically assisted end-of-life procedures. What are they proposing?
Well, this legislation, which has been a long time in the making, has four key ingredients. So one, the person has to be competent. So you don't want someone who's suicidal, mentally ill, using this legislation. Second, they have to be near end of life with an incurable condition. Then they need two doctors to agree to their medical condition and to carry out the procedure, i.e. give them a lethal dose of a drug. And then finally, there has to be a 15-day, what they call a period of reflection, to ensure people are really serious about this and it's not just a whimsy or something. So there's really strict rules about who this would apply to, and would probably be a very small number of people in reality.
And you said it was a long time coming, so maybe you could just give us, again, a bit of the background on this Dying with Dignity Select Committee that the province went through. What was that about?
Well, we know this debate's been going on for years in Canada and around the world. And in Quebec, Quebec likes to tackle social issues on a grand scale with parliamentary commissions, etc. So they struck an all-party committee a few years back now, and it finally tabled its report in March of 2012, so almost a year ago. Very extensive report, almost 500 pages, which talked about all kinds of end-of-life issues, with one small chapter on what we call physician-assisted suicide or physician-assisted death, and that's the one that's getting all the attention. So this is a long time coming. A little quirk in there that's interesting is the junior health minister now, who's introducing this legislation, was part of that committee, and all the parties were represented, and it was unanimous. So this legislation should go through the House pretty quickly in Quebec.
So it did have broad, the panel was made up across this political spectrum. It did have broad appeal.
Yes, it had unanimous appeal. There was very little opposition politically anyhow. There were, of course, groups that opposed this.
Gotcha. Okay. But medically assisted suicide, if I'm right, is still illegal under the Criminal Code of Canada. So how is what they're planning in Quebec going to get around that?
Well, so Quebec had that first step, this report looking at everything, and then it had a second report, which was a committee of lawyers that looked exclusively at this issue. How can you do it legally? Because of the federal-provincial division of powers, the Criminal Code is the responsibility of Ottawa, and Ottawa doesn't want to have anything to do with this. So this team of legal experts put out their report, which is almost 300 pages, and its conclusion, very briefly, was that you can essentially circumvent the criminal code by telling prosecutors, don't prosecute if the conditions are met, those four conditions that I told you a moment ago. So this has been done in the past. Quebec did this for almost 12 years when it was illegal in Canada to have abortions, and Quebec allowed them for almost a dozen years with this same approach, just telling prosecutors not to prosecute.
And the reason, again, that if I understand this right, the reason they can do that is because this is, you know, theoretically about healthcare, and healthcare's provincial jurisdiction, therefore, ... Is that it?
Exactly. The province is arguing that this is a health act to give someone a medication, even if it's a lethal one, that's a health act and that's a provincial jurisdiction. And then there's also a more minor issue that provinces do have some leeway in how they apply the criminal code, even though they can't change it technically.
I understand. Okay. This is not just a Quebec thing, of course. I understand British Columbia had a court decision that dealt with this as well. Fill us in on that.
Yeah, so the Gloria Taylor case we know very well. Gloria Taylor also challenged. She was someone with ALS, wanted the right to be assisted to die if need be. And she won her case in BC court. And then sadly she died, not with assisted death, but just died of natural causes. But her case is proceeding to the Supreme Court because it was appealed by Ottawa. And there's a similar situation in BC where, awaiting this decision, they've told Crown prosecutors, we don't want these cases prosecuted. We want to wait until the Supreme Court makes a decision.
Now, this was an ALS case, and of course, maybe the first and most famous one was this case 20 years ago of Sue Rodriguez, also, I think, from British Columbia, who lost her bid from physician-assisted suicide. Are the cases similar in any way besides the illness?
Almost identical. The only thing that's really changed is, I think, public attitudes over time. So the Supreme Court 10 years ago, 1992, was really divided on this, on whether it was allowed, and decided against Sue Rodriguez, who, as we know, went ahead and was assisted with her death anyhow, and nothing happened, no one was ever prosecuted. It's almost an identical case with Gloria Taylor, but Gloria Taylor, again, like Sue Rodriguez, was always clear on, I want to win the principle, and then I'll decide later on if I take that choice to be assisted. And Gloria Taylor never had that choice. She wasn't helped in her death.
And why did they say that the law against assisted suicide was discriminatory under the Charter of Rights and Freedoms?
So if we go back 10 years, the Supreme Court, the main argument for rejecting this was the slippery slope argument, the danger that this would be overused, that we'd cull people with severe disabilities, etc. People wouldn't always have a say. Now, with the BC case, it was on much more narrow grounds, and it was an interesting discussion. They were saying it's not illegal to die by suicide in Canada. It's only illegal to be assisted. So what this BC court said is, if someone with ALS, where you lose the ability to use your arms with, to do things yourself, then they're discriminated against because they don't have that ability to end their life as they so choose. They need assistance with it. So that's why the ALS cases tend to go to court. They have a very specific inability to carry out suicide themselves. So the debate becomes really narrow there. Can they be helped if they have the wish? And with ALS, you're fully mentally competent as well, which makes it an unusual disease. So you lose that argument. So that's why the ALS cases tend to get to court.
And what's the federal government's position on all this?
Well, the federal government very much has the slippery slope argument. They say, oh, we can't allow this, it's going to be abused, it's not right, we shouldn't be, the role of physicians should be to heal, not to kill, and that's why they're appealing. So they've made it clear they don't want to amend the criminal code.
Does the ruling make assisted suicide, in essence, legal in Canada now?
Well, because it's a BC court ruling, no. We're waiting for the Supreme Court to decide. So it's not legal, but we have a case where practically no one's going to prosecute a case. But to be fair, we almost never prosecute these cases anyhow. It's sort of there is very much of a parallel with abortion, where the public, I think, attitudes are way ahead of the legislation by probably a decade. So we had a situation with abortion where before the law was struck down by the Supreme Court, there were 60,000 abortions a year in Canada, and it was technically illegal. So we have a very similar situation with assisted death, where a lot of people are being assisted, not a lot, but a very small number, and these cases aren't being prosecuted. There's a case in Quebec that's very well known, Daniel Odès, again, another man with ALS, who said quite publicly, I'm going to get somebody to help me die, nobody's going to stop it, and he did it. No one's been prosecuted, and his mother talks quite openly about it. I'm happy that my son got his wishes carried out. I hope no one ever gets prosecuted. That's the state of reality, that people accept this, but it's still legally not accepted yet.
Well, you say people accept it, and certainly the political manifestation of that, as you told us off the top, was a unanimous vote among the Quebec politicians that were looking at this. But there are certainly groups out there who oppose this, and I wonder how loudly they're making their voices heard on this.
Well, I think there's always going to be opposition. There's always going to be concern. And the big concern is, and it's a legitimate one, is that we really have to have the ballasts. You have to ensure that this isn't done willy-nilly. We don't want people who are depressed saying, oh, give me a pill, I want to die. That's not how society should function. This is a very minority case where people really, they're almost dead, but they're physically alive, which, ALS really embodies that issue where you're almost trapped inside your body. So this really won't apply to very, very many cases. And I should stress that, the really important part of the Quebec report is the one that doesn't get any attention, which is about how it's really essential to have good palliative care to make these cases almost moot. We should almost never need to assist someone to die. We should be assisting them to having a pain-free life until they die. And that should be the goal, with very, very few exceptions. That
is a great debate, though, right? I mean, Margaret Somerville, I know the ethicist, makes that point all the time, but then there are others in the medical profession who just say, we can't give you a pain-free death in all circumstances, and therefore. So where are we on this?
Well, I think what we really have to do, our priority should be, because again, this is, I think, a really sort of technical, small debate. I think we should make Canada a better place to die. And I write about this often, that Canada's an abysmal place to die. We have terrible palliative care services. Very few people get good end-of-life care. We die alone in hospitals, often in pain. It's really horrible. And there have been reports written about this. Canada ranks very poorly internationally on palliative care. That's where our debate and our investment should be happening, I think, and not so much around these technical legal issues. Because I think everyone can agree on that point, that we should have the least painful, least horrible death possible. And we have the technology, and we have the ability, and we have the money to do that, and we've just not done it.
Do you have a good sense, do you think, in your own mind about where the majority of doctors are on this issue? Because, of course, the conventional wisdom is they're going to take every possible effort to keep you alive, even if you're barely alive. So what do they want on this case?
Well, what doctors want above all is to not be forced to do this. And the legislation, again, that Quebec's proposing is very clear. It has to be voluntary. There has to be 2 physicians. So if we look at other jurisdictions around the world, there's a very tiny minority of physicians who tend to specialize. They become the ones who assist people to die. And they do it for, whatever reasons they have. They're civil libertarians, whatever. But it's going to be very few doctors doing this. No one will be forced to do it. Doctors' groups, when you hear them talking about this, the Quebec body of physicians actually has endorsed the law. They've said it's acceptable for physicians to carry out these procedures with the conditions laid out in the law. So that's really interesting. So I think what's most important for the physicians is those really strict conditions, that this isn't done, again, haphazardly, if you will. Okay,
you're going to forgive me here, but I'm going to quote the competition for a second. Here's Chantal Hébert writing in the Toronto Star last month. She writes, "If all this sounds like a movie you've seen before, it's because the assisted suicide debate is on a path that was already traveled over the course of the abortion and same-sex marriage sagas. In both instances, Quebec adopted as liberal an approach as Canada's legal framework would tolerate early on in the debate. In time, the rest of the country caught up to the province. It is not so much that on such matters Quebec is systematically ahead of the curve as that Parliament has a well-documented tendency to lag behind public opinion." If we take her position in this piece, André, do we assume that inevitably the country, both politically and legally, is eventually going to catch up is maybe the wrong way to say it, but is eventually going to match the Quebec position?
Well, yes, I share Chantal's position that I think Quebec is ahead of the curve for a couple of reasons. Just the willingness to have these debates about uncomfortable issues is much more accepted here. And again, I make the parallel with abortion. Quebec pushed things forward a lot on abortion, and this really is the parallel. So yeah, I agree fully. Ottawa's always going to be a laggard. It's more complex. There's much more different points of view. It's a little more difficult to do things federally. So yeah, I agree with her fully.
So it's clearly in the political arena in some provinces. I remember a couple of years ago, there was a Bloc Québécois member who brought forward a motion on this in the House of Commons as well. This issue doesn't seem to want to go away. That's fair to say, right?
Oh, it's absolutely not going away. It's not in a population that's aging, where people, we live good lives now, and we have people who are treating healthcare more as a consumer product, and they want good deaths. That's why this issue of palliative care is going to be top of mind for the next 2 decades, as we see the baby boom really explode. Death is going to be a big, big issue. It's going to be a good investment. A lot more people are going to be dying just as we're living longer, and they do want to die better. So I think politicians have to steel themselves for these discussions because they're not going away at all.
Understood. André, it's good of you to join us from Montreal tonight. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.